Legend of Total War here, and today I'm going to give you guys my opinion on which one unit from each individual race in Total War Warhammer 3 that I recommend that you at least recruit some of in your campaign as early as you possibly can. So these are units that I think have a lot of value, or are recruited quite easily, or are just able to massively punch above their pay grade in the campaign perspective, and I would highly advise against ignoring these units. Now before we get into it, I do need to let you guys know that this video here is sponsored by Manscaped. You guys know I've been with Manscaped for ages. Love the products, love working with them. Today, I want to show you the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. It comes with the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, the Weed Whacker 3.0 for your nose hairs, the Crop Soother Ball Aftershave, and the Crop Preserver Anti-Chafing Ball Deodorant. I've been using the Lawnmower electric razors for years, and I've never once cut myself, and it gets the job done fast, which is exactly what I want. Less time in the bathroom means more time playing games. Just remember to replace the razor blades every so often, so you're not shaving with a blunt instrument. It's cheap and easy to do. I stand by the Lawnmower razors, and if by now you still aren't convinced, you can ask people in the comment section about their experience with it as well. Click on the link in the description or pinned comment to get 15% off Manscaped products. Big thanks to Manscaped for once again sponsoring another video on this channel. Starting with the Beastmen, my recommendation are Minotaurs. Specifically Minotaurs with shields. I think they're the best ones because the type of enemies that you're going to be going up against are most likely going to have a lot of missile units, and so having a shield is very useful against that. But Minotaurs in general, all three variants are extremely useful. They have 3 different spots in the purchase for Dread screen, which is going to be useful for getting a decent capacity of them than, for example, trying to spam Gorgons. They come in at around the mid-game, which doesn't take that long for the Beastmen to get to. It doesn't require that much of your horde in order to be able to start recruiting Minotaurs, and they're able to get a lot of boosts through the tech tree. They're a fantastic unit that is really good for the Beastman playstyle, especially for ambushing. Highly recommend getting some Minotaurs. Bretonia's got a really weird roster in that their beginning roster at the start of the game is absolutely awful, and then their end game roster is super bloody strong. But the units that I would recommend gravitating towards are actually Knights of the Realm. This is a particularly good cavalry unit in a game where cavalry units are not particularly fantastic, because it has a speciality of having anti-large. You'll have other units in the game, other cavalry units, say anti-infantry without any actual anti-infantry bonus. It's just like a high charge bonus. But the thing is, with Knights of the Realm, they're good against infantry and against cavalry and against large units, as long as they're getting the charge in. They're fast, they're heavily armored, and they're not overly expensive, as long as you've at least done the first vows for your particular lord, which is not very difficult to do. Highly recommend getting yourself a whole bunch of Knights of the Realm. When it comes to Cathay, all of the Jade Warrior variants are all fantastic, and they're all available very early on in the campaign, the max being at tier 3. But I've got to give it to the Jade Warrior crossbows with shields for them being just all-round versatile at a pretty decent price point, and can be heavily boosted, of course, by Gate Guard. So very valuable unit early on, definitely worth rushing towards. As for the Chaos Dwarves, my top recommendation is getting a blunderbuss unit or 2. I would not recommend spamming them. It's kind of difficult to do that considering they've got unit caps, but having a blunderbuss or 2 in your army, this is your solution for dealing with extremely powerful legendary lords like Grimgor Ironhide or Thorgrim Grudgebearer. They're also able to absolutely mow down infantry as long as they've got a good line of sight. This is a unit that you want your entire army to move around so that this one can perform the best that it possibly can. It can easily inflict hundreds of kills and potentially even kill Grimgor Ironhide if he's coming at you, if you get a good line of sight on him. High value unit that'll save your ass in many situations. Highly recommended. Now, the Dark Elves have got a really strong roster, but at the very top of that roster really has to go the Shades. Now, of the Shades, the Greatsword variant is the best, but really all 3 are completely viable. It's just a matter of how good do you want them to be in melee. The Shades Greatswords, slightly better than the other 2. So Shades can be recruited very early on. You can recruit them from Black Arcs very easily, and this is a unit that if you want to spam them, you totally can. If you don't want to spam them, that's fine as well. But this is a unit that the more of them you purchase, the more value you're going to get out of them, largely because of their ability to stalk, which the AI is very bad at handling. These units dish out tons of damage, and for an early game unit, that's exactly what you want to be seeing when you're going up against immense odds. Highly recommend grabbing some Shades, whichever variant you want, but Greatswords are the best. So the Dwarves have one of the most robust rosters in the entire game, but one of their most standout units has got to be the Gyrocopters. The fact that you can recruit them at tier 2 and pump them out in just 1 turn each And the fact that most units in the game will just simply not be able to attack them makes them hugely viable, even if you're not playing as Malachi McKayson. Every single Dwarf Lord will get a ton of value by recruiting an absolute heap load of gyrocopters because they're not overly expensive. They can be hugely boosted all throughout the campaign, and there's only a few units in the game that you really need to be worried about. And most of the kind of units that you would go up against that it would be a threat are the kind of units you would actually be allied to. So Greenskins, Warriors of Chaos, they all struggle against the gyrocopters because they're not good at dealing with flying units that shoot at them. As for the Empire, their go-to unit is something that's a little bit more late game, the Hellstorm rocket batteries. I do not recommend you spam them in your armies and get like 10 of them in each army. Really, 1 or 2 is all you need. This unit is meant to thin out the enemy forces, especially if there's a lot of infantry units. But as the game progresses and the enemy forces start to get more and more monsters, this is a unit that you really don't want to bring onto those fights because they're not good against single entities or monsters, but they're an absolute infantry killer. But it's really important that they have a very good line of sight, so you've got to be very careful about sending them into the jungle and shooting into trees because they will blow everything up around them, including your own troops. So really strong unit, can get a lot of potential out of it, but could also be quite tricky to use. Highly recommended getting at least 1 Hellstorm rocket batteries in each of your armies. As for the Greenskins, they have a roster that's so filled with bloat and a ton of garbage. The vast majority of their units are tactically worthless. However, they've got a couple of units that are absolute gems set in amongst a pile of shit. And one of those units happens to be a very low tier unit, the Nasty Skulkers. These being high damage stalking units that are especially good at your initial starting enemy, in most cases being the dwarfs, being able to get in there and sneak up on their artillery and dish out massive amounts of damage, and being able to slow enemy units down with their smoke bombs. They're cheap, they can be heavily boosted. Highly recommend getting a couple of them to sneak up on particularly dangerous opponents like dwarfs. My opinions on the High Elves have actually changed quite a bit since Total War Warhammer 2, whereas previously I would have said Sisters of Avalon. I now believe that Lothern Seaguard are actually the must-have unit to recruit in Warhammer 3, largely due to how convenient they are to recruit. They're the only unit that you can recruit because of a port. You'll most likely get access to 10 ports very early on, which means you'll be able to globally recruit these units in a single turn before most of the other units in your roster. And also, Lothern Seaguard are able to be doubly boosted in the red skill line, whereas most other units in the game, including Sisters of Avalon, only have 1 skill that boosts them. These ones having 2, meaning you put 6 points that boost them, boost their ammunition, and you can boost their combat stats, making them a hell of a lot more valuable in the early stage of the campaign. And also, being able to recruit units, especially globally, in a single turn, is a huge amount of value in on itself. And at the end of the day, the Sisters of Avalon do require 2 turns to recruit, with some exceptions. There's some ways to reduce it down to 1. They're still better units than Lothern Seaguard, but the early game is the most important, and Lothern Seaguard is going to carry you a lot further because they're just going to be available to you in that early stage of the game. Now, as for Khorne, they can really just recruit anything they want and they'll be fine. Just be aggressive, that works with Khorne. Their roster is incredibly robust, basically the opposite of the Greenskins. But if I had to pick a unit that you should absolutely go and recruit as early as you possibly can, it'd have to be the Wrathmongers. There's so much you can do to boost them. They are incredibly strong and they can take on just about any regular unit in the game if they're given enough support. And they're easy to get, even though they're a high tier unit, because Khorne's growth is ridiculously fast if you are aggressive. They are a highly effective killing machine, and I really recommend them. They're fantastic units. So Kislev has a very versatile roster. Most of their units are in some form a hybrid. But if I had to pick one, I'd have to go to the Akshina Ambushers. So this one here is very similar to a Shade in that it stalks, and it's a missile unit, so you move it around, keep it away from the rest of your visible army, and ambush the enemy forces, because the AI is just really vulnerable to those kinds of tactics, and they've got a good amount of damage output, and you can get a lot of really good results out of them. But the main thing here is to make sure they're properly supported by an army that's not going to get them caught early on, because they're not particularly good in melee. But this is a unit that you can get a lot of value out of just because of the value from stalking. So when it comes to the Lizardmen, my opinions on them basically hasn't changed since Total War Warhammer 2. While some of their units are more viable than they were before, I still think that their go-to unit is the Stegodon. It's an artillery piece, essentially one of the only artillery pieces that the Lizardmen have access to. It is a single entity monster that's good in melee against anti-infantry, and it's also able to utilize access to healing magic because of skink oracles and life slants and whatever else you've got access to that will give you some healing. That's really effective for single entity monsters. If you want to just recruit one of them, that's fine. If you want to recruit a whole army full of stegodons, also fine. The Lizardman economy is much better now than it used to be, so they can sustain a fair few more stegodons than they were able to before. But this is a unit that I would not ignore. It's fantastic. Since Total War Warhammer 2, I don't think there's been a single faction that's changed quite as much as Norsca. They've gone through complete overhauls, and while I still think that their best unit is the War Mammoth, their unit that you must recruit in all of your campaigns, in my opinion, is actually the Marauder Berserkers. And the reason for this is that it's recruited very early on, and it has a bonus versus infantry, and they're very fast units. You're able to pump these guys out really quickly, and just mow over your early game enemies very quickly. And that anti-infantry bonus is going to be especially useful if you have to deal with dwarfs. Whereas other units that you're going to have access to in that early stage of the campaign are just not going to pack that same amount of punch. Most of them just don't dish out enough armor piercing, or they just don't have enough speed, and they're not going to go toe-to-toe with regular units of other factions. And since the AI cheats have been toned down since Total War Warhammer 2, all of the melee infantry in the Norscan roster are suddenly significantly more valuable, and so the Marauder Berserkers kind of shine above them. It's definitely a unit that you should phase out at some point, but in the early stage of the game, which is the most important, go straight for the Marauder Berserkers and just roll over everything that you can. So when it comes to Nurgle, it's a little bit weird for them, since they don't recruit via the same way that everyone else does. They get recruit pools that slowly replenish over time due to a cyclical nature of their buildings. But I reckon their go-to unit is actually one of their latest game units, the Rot Knights. Now the thing is, it doesn't actually take that long to get to this unit, it's just getting a lot of them will take a long time. Now the reason why I think Rot Knights are the ones to go for is because they're fast, they've got regeneration, and they're anti-large. All of this stuff here is going to be very useful for Nurgle, and so getting these as early as possible should be a priority. When it comes to the Ogres, they've got a lot of redundancy built into their roster. Lots of monstrous infantry and a hell of a lot of single entity monsters. So if I had to pick one that stands out amongst them, it'd have to be the Thunder Tusk. Because even though this is one of their latest game units, it does not take that long to get the Ogre camps up to tier 5 and then get yourself a Thunder Tusk or 2 or 3 or 10 or 20. It's entirely up to you. Their budget shouldn't be a concern, and this is a unit that just has so much versatility, and there's so much you can do to boost them, and there's so few things that the enemy can do to actually hurt them, that once you've started recruiting Thunder Tusks, it's basically game over, you've won. But if you're not looking for an easy win in your campaign, at least getting 1 or 2 Thunder Tusks will definitely provide a lot of value. They work well in a balanced army, they work well in a Doom stack, it's entirely up to you, but Thunder Tusks are fantastic. When it comes to the Skaven, my opinions haven't really changed. Rattling guns are the way to go. When it comes to missile units, there are few units in the game that have as much damage potential based on the amount of ammo that they've got than rattling guns. And on top of that, being able to suppressive fire enemy forces that are rushing towards you makes them really effective against enemy cavalry charges, so you can slow them down, giving you more time to deal with them. And also, because their shots kind of fly all over the place, it does make them a bit dangerous for friendly fire, but that's okay as long as you don't put storm vermin in front of your troops. It allows for you to miss and still hit units behind the one that you were aiming for and slow them down as well. So they're really good against single entities, infantry, monsters, everything. The only thing they're not good against are things that have a ton of missile resistance, but there's only a couple of those kind of units in the game. You just got to be careful about them. It's definitely not a unit that I would ever spam in an army, but throwing a couple of them together into an army is really effective just because of how much damage potential they have over the course of a single battle. When it comes to Slaanesh, my recommendation is to get a couple of Hellstriders as quickly as possible. It's a very early game unit, and it's a cavalry unit, which is usually a poor performer in the game. However, Hellstriders are some of the fastest cavalry units in the game. In fact, they're faster than Warhounds, and they've got some of your earliest game anti-large, short of having Marauder Spears, which are trashy units. So these ones are going to be really effective at dealing with enemy cavalry, going toe-to-toe with them and providing a lot of value for you. Because you'll be able to outrun anything that you don't want to fight, and anything that doesn't want to fight you won't be able to outrun you. So that allows you to dictate the terms of the battle, which gives you a massive advantage in most engagements. This is a highly valuable unit if you are willing to micro them effectively. It's definitely not something that you can just throw into any fight and just blindly hope that they'll win. They've got to be taken with care, but a couple of them in any army gives you the ability to maneuver around very well. So a very valuable unit for the Slaanesh. So the Tomb Kings has one of the weakest rosters in the entire game. Most of their units are kind of below the tier that they really should be, but you overcome that with numbers. But the unit that you should really try to get as early as possible and that will carry you throughout most of the game is actually a Casket of Souls. This one here is able to inflict massive amounts of damage on the enemy forces as long as you can get their infantry clustered up enough, and it actually complements your infantry, your skelly bones, as much as they possibly could, because their job is basically to hold the line, not to dish out damage. The skeleton archers, they're just not really great at dishing out damage, but the Casket of Souls, you could very easily get 3, 4, 500 kills in a single battle without any real difficulty whatsoever. So this is a must-have in the early stage of the campaign in order to carry you through to the mid-game and late game where you can actually get your better units. So when it comes to Tzeentch, most of their units are pretty good. But if you're going to play Tzeentch, you might as well cheese the hell out of the game. And there's no cheesier unit than the Chaos Warshrine of Tzeentch. All you have to do is bring one of these units, summon a couple of units around it to begin with, wait for those units to run out of time and die, and it will fully charge up the Chaos Warshrine of Tzeentch's ability, which is to provide you with spell intensity and Winds of Magic power reserve. Now, playing as Tzeentch, having unlimited Winds of Magic is going to be very useful, and this Winds of Magic battery stacks. So the more of them that you bring, the more Winds of Magic you can generate. So if you're playing as Kairos, bringing a couple of Chaos Warshrines of Tzeentch is going to be really effective for him to basically just become a machine gun of spells, and the enemy just won't be able to do much about it. As long as you keep them hidden as well. So doing anything that you can to make those units stalk would also be really effective. So Chaos Warshrine of Tzeentch, highly recommended, which you could also use as a mount for certain characters. So really nothing has changed much for the Vampire Coast since Total War Warhammer 2, and so my pick for them is pretty much the same. Necrofex Colossus. Now, you'll probably get to this one a little bit later than you could in Warhammer 2. The growth requirements are just a little bit slower, but it's still the go-to unit. Most of the Vampire Coast units are pretty trashy, and this is the kind of unit that if you want to put one of them in your army, great. If you want to put all of them in your army, then that's great as well. And because there's a hell of a lot that you can do to boost them through your tech tree and various other things, especially when playing as Noctilus, you can get an absolute ton of value out of the Necrofex Colossus and punch way above its pay grade. And the fact that it's also a single entity monster as well as being an artillery piece, meaning that your Lore of Vampires is going to be especially effective at being able to regenerate them. So over the course of many battles on a single turn, you're going to get a lot of value out of this unit. When it comes to the vampire counts, most of their roster is pretty rubbish, but there is one standout unit that is able to wipe out entire armies by themselves, and that's the Mortis Engine. Given a little bit of support, so a few units of infantry around it, it is able to get a whole bunch of enemy infantry to just get wiped out in just a couple of minutes. You just need to be careful not to have it go up against a single entity monster or sufficient enough missile units in order to kill it very quickly. It does have regeneration and it provides a regeneration aura, so it's going to be effective for your heroes to support them, which is the real strength of the vampire counts, and also to support your other trashier units that are just cheaper and more available. You only need one Mortis Engine. Getting more than that in any particular army is totally unnecessary because the effect doesn't stack, and honestly just one Mortis Engine can kill enemy infantry super bloody quickly. Highly dangerous unit. Recommend getting them in any of your infantry based armies. So when it comes to the Warriors of Chaos, their roster is kind of weird. You have to pick something that is just readily available to you. So the most valuable unit is going to be something that you can actually recruit. So saying something like Dragon Ogre Shaggis is not going to be the case because they are so hard to get, a lot of them, or even any of them, especially in the early game, and that's the part that really matters. So the unit that I'm going to choose is actually Bile Trolls. Now I know that some of the Warriors of Chaos Legendary Lords are not able to recruit them, and for those, just you can go for Armor Trolls. They'll work almost as well, but the Bile Trolls are definitely the best of the trolls because there's a gift of chaos that you can provide them that will give them a lot of missile resistance, and that'll stack with other gifts of chaos that you can give them, which will give them missile resistance, making Bile Trolls essentially have some of the highest missile resistance of any unit in the game, period. So Bile Trolls just being able to rush in on missile-heavy factions, which will be your primary enemy, cause a huge stench, dish out loads of damage, and they have a higher base morale than the regular trolls anyway, so they're going to be significantly more effective. And because trolls are available everywhere, it's not going to be difficult for you to get access to a lot of Bile Trolls early on in the game. So a lot of value comes from these units. They're fantastic. When it comes to the Wood Elves, their specialities do largely depend on which faction you're playing as, but across all of them, universally, there is one unit that will perform above pretty much everything else, and that is the Tree Men. getting either one of them in your army or getting a full stack of tree men is going to provide a lot of value if you pair it up with a life wizard, because tree men are able to hold their position for such a long time because of how durable they are. You can cast down dwellers below around them to just wipe out tons of enemy infantry, and because they're a single entity, you can heal them quite easily. They're quite resistant to just about everything. They can get fire resistance, physical resistance, missile resistance, making them, through the course of the campaign, stronger and stronger and stronger. And there's a ton of things that you can do to actually reduce their upkeep costs, so they're not overly expensive as you progress through the campaign. The only problem with them is just how late you're going to get them, but factions such as Dryka are able to get them very early on. But highly recommend that you at least pick up a couple of tree men, because they're one of the best units in the game, period. So that's my pick for the unit that you must recruit for every race in Total War Warhammer 3. I know as well that I've omitted Daniel the Demon Prince, but I largely think that if you're playing as Daniel, you should probably make up your own mind about which unit you should recruit, because he's got a huge amount of variety, and the unit that is going to get the most amount of value largely depends on what your equipment is going to be. So that's up to each player to decide on that. There is no, in my opinion, one unit that you must recruit in Daniel the Demon Prince's campaign. But yeah, as for everything else here, keep in mind that I didn't necessarily choose the best unit in their roster or the strongest unit, but rather the unit that would provide the most amount of value or the most amount of convenience, the unit that's going to help your campaign out the most. In some of their cases, it was actually, in my opinion, the best unit in their roster, and in other ones, it's actually a fairly low tier unit that just provides a lot of value in the most important stage of the game, which is in the early stages. Getting a good start in the early stage of the campaign will set you up well for the rest of the campaign, so you don't even need to be efficient for the rest of that. So anyway, if you disagree with any of the picks that I've made here, let me know in the comments below, and let me know why you think that another unit would be more valuable to a campaign, that you must recruit that instead of this other one. Anyway, appreciate you guys. Don't forget to check out Manscaped, link in the pinned comment and the description. Big thanks to them once again for sponsoring this video, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.